And I was able to look down and see myself in my broken body with a heart pump keeping me alive in my green hospital gown. I had that moment where I saw the nurses that took care of me coming in and out of the room and how their lives flashed in front of me. And it was kind of interesting to see how I had judged some of them and how I had judged myself for my own life. I saw my own life in front of me, how I judged myself so harshly for the mistakes that I had made. And then I saw Maria. Maria came to me, and I, in the unspoken language of the ethereal, I asked her, Maria, speak to me. I've never heard you say my name. I don't know what to do for you when you're having seizures. I don't know how to help you. We've tried everything. We've tried to find a cure, and I don't know. And I just broke down, and she just looked at me and she said, just love me.
Welcome to Stories of Hope in Hard Times, the show that explores how people endure and even thrive in difficult times, all with God's help. I'm your host, Tamara K. Anderson. Join me on a journey to find inspiring stories of hope and wisdom learned in life's hardest moments. My guest today was born one of 4 boys outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, to Italian immigrants. His grandfather and father worked at a steel company where he began his career right out of high school. And for the past 25 years, he has worked as a sales engineer living in Texas, California, Nashville, Tennessee, and now he resides in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's won several awards for his sales efforts, including Diversity Supplier Award for the Minority Business Development Council. He's been blessed to have been married for 30 years, and he's also been blessed with a wonderful daughter, Maria, who is 23 and has been diagnosed with Rett Syndrome, a rare neurological disorder. I am so pleased to present Rob Gentile. Rob, are you ready to share your story of hope?
I certainly am. Thank you for having me today.
Oh, my goodness. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. Rob and I met a couple of years ago at an author training, and he has the most fascinating story to share and had a near-death experience. And so we're going to dive into that. But before we do, Rob, you had a passion, and you have a passion with photography. Why don't you tell me about that really quick?
Sure. Yeah, that started, my passion for photography started actually in the 7th and 8th grade, where my brother had given me a camera to play with, and I've always been very visual anyway. So I took the lead and started to research about photography and got into. I've always been fascinated with light, and I started to play with different lights and look through the lens and became fascinated with the whole process. So from there, I built, and at the time, which was kind of cool for an 8th grader, but I built a little dark room in my basement back home in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, and I began to develop my own photographs. And once I started to do that, I was hooked. Yeah.
And this even led to a little bit of a career with photography, where you got pictures published in the New York Times. Why don't you quickly tell us about that?
Sure. So what happened is that, as you'd mentioned in the intro, I was born and raised in a steel town. That's all I knew. Steel's in my blood. And when I came out of the steel mill, my first job was to get transferred to Dallas, Texas, where the steel company said, look, if you stay with us for 5 years, we'll pay for part of your college. So of course I signed up for that.
Yeah.
But after about 13 years with that particular corporation, they had gotten bought out, and one thing led to another, and they dissolved the company and went out of business. So I found myself without work, and I decided, what a great opportunity to take a left-hand turn in my life and dedicate a year and a half to my passion, which was photography, and see what happens. And I was drawn to, because there's another one of my brothers, the second oldest brother of my family, is actually a writer, and he had gotten a contract with Newsweek. And ironically, I taught him photography,
Oh,
and he gets the contract with Newsweek as a writer, and started to pick up a camera. And he ended up first in Mexico, and then in Central America, where he eventually landed in Nicaragua. So I decided to get a tutor, learn Spanish, and I bought an old Toyota Land Cruiser Jeep. And believe it or not, I drove to Guatemala, where I spent 6 weeks with a family immersed in the language. And when I thought I had a decent handle around the language, I drove into Nicaragua, and I was a stringer, freelance stringer for the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune.
wow.
So it was an experience, Tamara, that I will never regret. As difficult as it was to be in combat, it's kind of like, ironically, had prepared me for the 23 years of dealing with Rett Syndrome, for dealing with heart transplant and my journey there, and it was good combat training for what was yet to come.
Isn't it interesting that God uses experiences in our past to prepare us for our future? Sometimes you don't see it at the time, but looking back, what do they say? Hindsight's 2020.
That's right. That's right. No. Who would have thunk it, as they say, right? Here I was. And I was able to do some very diverse and fascinating things while I was in Central America. I was in several combat situations where we were under fire, and I had some of the soldiers dive on me, young soldiers, 17, 18 years old, just pile up on top of me, and until the firefight was over. And then I would come out of that and I would say, "Why did you do that?" And they said, "Well, because we want the truth to get out. We
Wow.
want people to know what's happening here. So it was important for us to save you." Um, I lived in one of the only leprosy camps left in Central America. I lived with a dry leprosy family and photographed what it was like to be a leper, which was fascinating to me.
Oh, yes.
So it was a very diverse experience, and I spent about a year and a half there. And when the war ended, of course, nobody wanted to buy my pictures anymore, so it was time to come home.
Well, there you go. So let's dive into a little bit more of that story that all of this background prepared you for. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your heart and everything that has happened with that?
Sure, sure. So on January 26, 2016, out of nowhere, actually, it was a very, very freaky thing. The only thing that my doctors could figure out is that what possibly precipitated this was I had some minor surgery done to remove some bone spurs on my neck,
Hmm.
which from old sports injuries and just life in general. And I went to Pittsburgh, ironically, where I'm from, because there's a Korean doctor there that goes in through the front of the neck instead of cutting the back of the neck open and then having to fuse all the discs, and then you're in pain the rest of your life, right?
Right.
So he's developed this procedure where people come from all over the world to see this doctor. And he goes in through the front. It's called a foraminal anatomy. He cuts the neck, puts a small slit in the neck, and pushes the esophagus aside. And he goes in with special drills, and he drills out the spurs.
Hmm.
So it was a very easy procedure. I was only in the hospital. They keep you 1 day to make sure there are no issues. And then 4 days later, in my bed back in Charlotte, North Carolina, at about 11 o'clock at night, I had a massive heart attack.
Oh, my goodness.
And my wife woke up in the middle of the night. I was screaming and writhing in pain. She thought it was my daughter having seizures, which is typically when my daughter would have seizures in the night. And she
Mm-hmm.
ran down the hall to check on Maria. Maria was fine, and she came back. She was disoriented and realized it was me, and called the ambulance. And I don't remember any of this.
Mm.
I was rushed to the hospital. They could not revive me.
Wow.
I laid what they call, pulseless and unresponsive for 20 minutes as they worked on me. They did several injections of epinephrine, paddle shocks, where they massaged the heart. I mean, they threw, as one of the doctors told me later, he said, we threw the kitchen sink at you. We did everything we could. And they certainly did. So after about 20 minutes, they were about to give up on me, and finally there was a little sign of a heartbeat. And the cardiologist rushed in, and they fished a balloon pump up through my groin, and they found that the blockage in the widowmaker. They put in 2 stents, but it was already too late. My heart was so damaged, I immediately slipped into a 4-day coma.
Hmm.
And when I woke from my coma, I was told that, of course, my heart was completely destroyed, and the only way I could survive would be to have a transplant. So I was 56 years old when that happened.
Wow.
And had no previous signs of any heart condition, always full of life and vitality, no issues there. So you can imagine that started me on a quest to try to figure out how to get a heart.
I guess we should finish your story. You eventually did get a heart transplant, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's finish the story and then we'll dive into the lessons.
Sure. So it's kind of a Hollywood story, what had happened, because here in Charlotte, of course, I went to a variety of heart transplant centers, regionally here, to try to get a heart. And everyone told me the same story. Hey, hearts are in short supply. We can do a variety of things. We can keep you in the hospital for 40 days and put you on what they call the critical list. And if a heart arrives, it'd be kind of miraculous. And if it doesn't, we have to put you in this device called the LVAD, which is widely used for people who cannot get a heart. But for me, for a lot of personal reasons, it wasn't an option, because it's a mechanical pump that they literally install in you. And for me, working with Maria and trying to continue on with life, it just wasn't suitable. So I was turned down by 3 or 4 different organizations, and I was about to give up. I called my boss at work, and I work for an independent steel company that's based out of Chicago. And my boss said, "Well, I didn't realize that you were, that bad off. I thought that you were recovering." I said, "No, I need a heart transplant to survive, so I guess I'm going to have to resign." And my boss said, "Well, let me talk to the owner of the company." And unbeknownst to me, the owner of the company is a philanthropist, and he donates quite a bit of money to the University of Chicago Medicine. And he found out about my situation, and the story goes, behind the scenes, he made a few phone calls to the University of Chicago Medicine. And 2 days later, he called me up. And
Wow.
he said, "Hey, Rob," he said, "you're going to get a phone call from a heart transplant surgeon at the University of Chicago Medicine, and please just listen to what this gentleman has to say, and maybe he can help you." Well, I got to tell you, Tamara, it was this guy called me from. He was actually in the lab, what they call the cath lab, the day that he called me, and you would have thought he was talking to the President of the United States. He was just so kind, and he said, "Look, if you come here and we don't find any pre-existing conditions, I'll take care of you personally, and I guarantee you that I will find you a perfect heart within to 4 months and transplant you.
Wow.
So 2 days later, my wife and I were on a plane, and we went to the University of Chicago Medicine. And I could tell you that 4 months later, I got transplanted,
Hmm.
which is incredible.
It's an incredible story. I've been blessed to read a copy of your book that's will soon be coming out, hopefully, right? And your
Yes,
story is just incredible. Oh my goodness, so many miracles happened. It's
one
not
after another,
chance, is it?
one after another. As I say in the book, what it's taught me is I don't believe in coincidences. I can tell you that.
Oh no.
Coincidences are God's way of remaining anonymous.
Oh, isn't that the truth though? Yeah.
It
So
is.
perhaps that's the first lesson. Now, why don't you talk to us about your near-death experience and what you learned there and how that has changed you?
Well, what I learned through that experience is that our real identity and strength comes from God, and that we are really spiritual beings, and that these bodies are just clay vessels that we're in temporarily to learn the lessons that we have to learn while we're here, and more importantly, to find our purpose, the purpose that God created us for. Each one of us is so individualized in God's eyes, and He's given us gifts that all of us need to, we need to flesh those out and fulfill them and contribute to humanity in our own special way while we're here. Because I've come to understand that God both expresses and experiences life through us. And I think that when we really understand that, when we understand that the gifts that we've been given are God's way of expressing Himself through us in this
Mm,
life, and we could treasure the individual gifts, whatever they are, and how small people think they might be. That is where the real richness and joy and depth of life comes from. I learned that, when I was lying on my back, when I awoke from my coma, my arms were paralyzed. I couldn't move. I get very emotional about this. Uh, and I remember my second oldest brother coming into the emergency room when I woke up, and I said to him, I can't help my daughter this way. I can't live my life like this. I can't work. Um, and I need you of all people, because my brother's a bit agnostic. He's covered every war on the planet for the past 30 years, so he's kind of hardened by that experience. And I said, I need you to take me to a state where they allow assisted suicide, because I can't even think about living my life like this. And he just crossed his arms and smiled at me, and he said no. And I realized in that moment that we're all called to rise to the challenge in a different way. And I think about now, if I had done that, what would have come of my daughter, and what would have become of my wife, and how tragically um, any contribution that I could have put forward, like I'm doing now, and through my book and through working and continuing to take care of my family, none of those things would have happened.
mm,
And so it teaches us that we have so much to offer. And not only that, I found that, and I write about this in the book, in different sections, the lessons that I've learned about how we're all connected and how one person's actions affect another. And sometimes we don't understand that, but we are so connected in spirit that had I taken my own life, I can't imagine the repercussions, any example I would have set, and the damage that I would have done to others in my family, my brothers, my daughter, my wife. So sometimes we have to step outside of ourselves to realize how valuable we are and how much meaning we have to others.
yeah, even when we feel we don't. that
Absolutely.
that I loved how you talked about how we're connected. I think you talk and describe it almost as a web, that you saw that we were almost connected like a web by a web of light. Can you describe that?
You know, exactly. That's what I saw. I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere, and the best way I could describe it is it's like looking outside an airplane window on a clear day, and all you see is blue sky. You see everything, but you really don't see anything at all. And that was the first part of my near death experience. I found myself standing in the middle of nowhere. And then uh, the more time I spent there, I saw and became part of what I can describe as this web. And it looked like it was made, it almost looked like you've seen neurons, right? Pictures of neurons
Mm-hmm.
like in brains. It looked like a web of neurons that were all interconnected. The tentacles were all interconnected, but inside the nucleus of each neuron was a quark of light. And I understood it in that place that each light represented a life. And it showed me how we were all interconnected, how what we do affect one another, both spiritually and in the temporal world. And I was curious to see that some parts of the web were darker than others. Some were, it looked like this mass of twinkling lights that just hung on the ceiling of the universe. It was a beautiful thing to see. And there were some parts of the web that were darker than others. And I had come to understand over the next couple of years, and some of the lessons that I've learned, what those parts of the web meant to me, and what I came to understand that they meant, the dark parts of the web. But yes, that's what that web looked like, and I believe that all animate and inanimate beings, our beings are connected, all of us.
Mm. I'm going to quote your book really quick because you talk about this. You said, we each experience a mini struggle of dark and light on a daily basis. We make choices every day out of free will to spread the light or hide the darkness. We were designed by the Creator with the innate ability to recognize the difference between good and evil. I believe God wove the universal fabric of the web into us as our moral compass. Darkness creeps into our lives when we disconnect ourselves from God's love and light. And
Yes,
I loved that description about how the choices that we make either help us be more connected to God or less connected to God. And it's just fascinating to me. And it really is a battle every day, isn't it?
it is. Absolutely. Yes. And it is all about choices. And, I think that's where, people get lost and confused about this. I'm from Western Pennsylvania. There's a huge Amish community there. And I loved kind of like one of their mantras. They say, as you pray, move your feet. So, we prayer is one of the things that I can't live without. I do every morning before my day starts so I can connect with God and have the strength to get through the day and put things in perspective. But also, God expects us to show up and do the work.
Mhm.
And I think this is the difference between and where some fall into the trap of what I would call sneaky spirituality, where if we meditate long enough, we can create a bowl of chocolate ice cream, but it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. I love that. I've never heard that saying before, but I never lived in Pennsylvania either. So
Right. Right.
that is really neat. So let me ask you, you mentioned that you spend a lot of time connecting with God every morning. Um, How do you feel that helps you throughout your day?
Well, I think that the most important thing that it does for me is that it puts the world in perspective by understanding that, first of all, again, that our identity comes from God.
Mm,
And I think that when we lose sight of that, that our identity comes from God, and we start to rely on the physical, we really get into trouble. Because, again, I go back to when I awoke from my coma, and I thought to myself, even if I had $10 million in the bank right now, it wouldn't help me,
mm,
because what is that going to do? I'm facing death, and my life flashed in front of me, and I said, what is it that I have done in my life that makes me worthy, that my family would be proud of, that I do the right thing, that I make the right choices. And that identity and is what gives me the foundation and the strength to go out into the world. And when the darkness does come and we have to make the right choice, sometimes it's painful.
mhm,
It's painful to make the right choice in the world. But when you start your day with that foundation, and you connect with the creator in such a way where it's okay to ask, but it's more about listening. It's more about listening to the Spirit of God than praying every morning with a wish list. At least for me. And again, this is my personal perspective of what I've learned through my journey, from near death to heart transplant and everything in between. Is that and sometimes I found that in nature, I connect really strongly with the Spirit of God in nature, to see God's creations, and just to there's a difference between you know looking at a flower and really seeing a flower. When you really see a flower for what it is, you should be awed by its magnificence. How in the world does this little thing create such beauty? And these are the things that connecting every morning does for me.
mm. I think for me, being out in nature reminds me of God's love.
Hmm.
You can't help but be in the mountains or by the trees or even in the grass or looking at a flower, like you said, and just if you pause and really think about it, all this was created for us. And they're signs of God's love. And I just it blows my mind. So I really feel that as well when I'm out in nature. It is. It's
Absolutely.
yeah. Oh, it's beautiful. My goodness. So wow. Here we are diving into all these lessons, choice and connecting with God. Um, you mentioned that one of the things you learned in your near death experience was the power of love. And why don't you explain that to us?
Well, I learned that, particularly when I had my near-death experience, and then I look back on everybody that was put in place to help me survive. And I've always said this about, even when I was taking my daughter all over North America to look for a cure for Rett syndrome. I can always tell the difference between what I called a physician who was a mechanic and a physician who was an intuitive healer and went to medical school for the right reasons, and,
Mm,
and who really had a connection with it. Right? I mean, you see this everywhere,
yes.
and you see this everywhere in life. And I'm not, believe me, criticizing anyone, but we all have different reasons for getting into the professions that we do. But I was always able to see the difference between someone who was acting out of a place of love and purpose, and it made such a big difference And I saw that through my near-death experience, that there's an unspoken language that God uses to speak through all of creation. And it's love. The doctors that helped save my life all have agreed with that. I saw it so many times throughout my journey. It was love that brought me back. Even in the darkest days of my anger towards God, when I fought, Maria's diagnosis and blamed God for all of it. It was the love that God was trying to reach me through Maria and show me how much He loved me through my daughter's condition. And I think that this is what adversity teaches us as well. Adversity, to me, I've come to understand, is God's way of trying to build a much closer relationship with us.
Ooh,
And
yes.
You probably have seen this in your own life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, it's so true. Adversity is a great teacher. I think here I'm trying to find a quote from your book on adversity that I copy and pasted. Oh, this is so interesting. You said, this is how the human race evolves. When life gives us adversity, God invites us to do something about it. Intellectual understanding is meaningless unless followed by action. We each have a choice to let adversity draw out the best part of us, pushing us toward greatness, or to remain stuck. And don't you think we sometimes seesaw between those? Like
all the time.
I kind of want to remain stuck, but I know I need to move forward.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Well, it's easy to remain stuck, isn't it?
It is easier to remain stuck.
Yeah.
Because it requires that work and effort to learn and grow and become better because of it. But it's also, I don't know, I'm trying to think of the right way it's also paralyzing to be stuck. And you talked about, you feel like one of the reasons we're here on earth is to fill the measure of our creation. And if we remain stuck, we're not doing that.
That's right. That's right.
And so I guess the blessing of adversity is it gives us an opportunity to grow and be better.
It certainly does.
Become better, I should say.
Yeah, become better. Yeah. And there's always there's always a surprise when you change your perspective about adversity. There's always a surprise waiting for you at the end of that. For me, it was, I'll share a very personal story with you. So I had developed this, I don't want to say hatred, it's a very strong word, but let's just put it this way. I didn't have a very good relationship with God for many years because, once again, I was playing the blame game and the self-pity game and everything else about Maria and what she could have become and the sickness and everything that we had gone through all these years. It's taken a tremendous toll on my family, both financially and emotionally and spiritually. But one day Maria had gone through this period where she was becoming toxic because she could not move her bowels. So every Sunday I would go through this process of giving her a coffee enema, and to help cleanse her, which saved her life actually. And I will never forget my conversion. That's the day that I knew that God existed, and that's the day that things changed for me. So it was a cold February morning, and it was a Sunday, and I had her in the tub, and I was on my hands and knees, and of course it's a really just vile process, as you can imagine.
Oh yes.
And my face is down in the tub and cleansing Maria out. And I just broke down and began to cry. And I cried out, to God, where are you? Where are you now? And I heard God speak to me through my spirit so strong. It was so real, Tamara. It was just unbelievable. When I asked that question, a very gentle, silent voice spoke to my spirit and said, look at me. I'm right here. And I looked up at Maria with her face at the other side of the tub. And she had this incredibly beautiful, just glowing, warm smile on her face. And I knew exactly what had happened right there. The Spirit of God was speaking through that child and telling me, I'm right here in the person of your daughter. Mm-hmm. And this is what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be caring for me. You're supposed to love me.
Ooh, you made me all emotional. Oh, I tell you, caring for special needs children, you eventually realize they are gifts.
That's right.
And I, like you, had a really hard point coming to terms with that, because I knew God could heal my child. I knew he had that power. I didn't understand why he wouldn't. Mm-hmm. But I also didn't see the years down the road where by loving and living and giving and serving this child, what that would make me. And God could see that all along. And so me trying to pray it away, God's like, nope, this will help you become better, Tamara. Darn it.
Well, see, Tamara, that's what I was referring to. And now you've expressed it probably better than I. But this is the gift, the unexpected gift at the end of the road that I was talking about, that when you face adversity, there's no question, it is painful. I'm not trying to pray away pain because it's real and we have to face it. But when you face it, these unexpected gifts are at the end of the tunnel, just like for you and just like for me. And not only that, what special needs children teach us is that they're pure God energy, they're pure spirit. I mean, they're innocent. Everybody has a different perception of sin. Not going to get into that. Let's not even call it that. But when you think about somebody like Maria who can't talk, she can't feed herself, she can't walk without assistance. I mean, let's just put it this way. There's not an ulterior motive in her being. Mm-hmm. She's just pure. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to me that special needs children sometimes are seen as not having the same value as, let's say, you or I, because they can't quote unquote, fit into society as we see as normal. But when you think about it, they are the ones that are showing us really. Many times I've been with Maria and I've thanked her for showing me what God really looks like.
Yeah. That pure love, right?
Right. Exactly.
My goodness, yes. Ooh, thank you. Well, we're going to take a quick break, but when we get back, will you share with us a little bit more about what the title of your book means? And also, can we dive into what you would tell someone in a similar situation?
Sure, you bet.
How many of you out there feel like your life is chaotic, crazy, and completely awful compared to the norm? What if I were to tell you that you are normal for you? I am so excited to announce that my book, Normal for Me by Tamara K. Anderson, is now available for purchase on Amazon. This book took me 10 years to write, and I share 20 years worth of lessons learned in my life detours, including being in a car accident and having 2 of my children diagnosed on the autism spectrum. In this book, I share the secrets of how I made it from despair to peace with God's help. I also include a bonus diagnosis survival guide at the very end of my Normal for Me book. The Diagnosis Survival Guide includes 12 tips to survive and thrive in tough times. Wouldn't you like to know what those are? So what are you waiting for? Grab your copy of Normal for Me today on Amazon. And we're back. I'm speaking with Rob Gentile about the lessons he learned from his near-death experience and having a heart transplant. It's been fascinating. We've also talked a little bit about lessons we've learned from having special needs children, and it's been fascinating to compare notes there. So, Rob, what would you share with someone in a similar situation who has just been through a harrowing experience, whether it's a heart transplant or special needs child or just something that is just so difficult? What would you share with them? What would you encourage them to do?
Well, the first thing that I would encourage them to do certainly is to work on that spiritual foundation, building that relationship with the Creator, because that is where our strength comes from. The physical challenges that I've been through, the 23 years of dealing with a special needs child, and you know, sleep deprivation for all these years, 15 years of seizures, living in a hospital for months on end with Maria. My wife probably hasn't slept through a night in 15 years. And, so when you go through this constant sleep deprivation, dealing with seizures, living in and out of the hospital, I travel in my job as a sales engineer. And I got to tell you, physically, without that spiritual foundation, it would be impossible to do.
Mm.
Your true strength and fortitude, in my experience personally, has come through that spiritual relationship, which I had to die to figure that out, Tamara. It wasn't an easy lesson learned. Okay. But the other thing is that I've learned is that I try to surrender my ego on a daily basis. And when I do that and realize that that my identity and my strength comes from God, it's kind of like, it goes back to this, and it's a conundrum because, as we talked about, you still have to do the work. You have to show up every day. You have to do the work. You have to set goals. You have to be realistic. We live in the world. But at the same time, there's a balance there that we have to have. And for me, surrendering the ego helps me to become more dependent on God.
Mm.
And there's this I like this aphorism. It's probably been around for a while. It's certainly not mine, but ego stands for edges God out.
Ooh.
And when we remove God from the picture and we try to rely on our own strength, like I did for so many years, that's where we get into trouble. And really, and I'm sure, Tamara, you've done this yourself, and you've talked about it in some of your experiences as well, that sometimes we feel guilty because we can't fix something.
Mm.
I can't
Yes.
cure Rett syndrome, but I'm going to tell you something. I gave it my all. and I think it's one of the reasons why my heart was so stressed. And they found that I did have some damage in my heart. So I think it's the years of compounded stress and the ego wanted to fix Maria. The ego wanted to solve all the problems. The ego wants to cure it. And we can apply that to whatever it is that each individual person is going through in their life. The ego wants us to rely on the brain and rely on the physical strength to fix and solve problems. And I could tell you, at least in my experience, it got me into big, big trouble.
Mm. And so what you learned then is that surrendering to God and letting Him help you solve it and leaning on Him for strength is the real lesson. And that's where real strength comes from.
Absolutely. And this all ties back into some of the earlier things we've talked about, which is identity, strength. All these things come from that relationship with God. So all of these things are intertwined,
Mm-hmm.
just
Mm-hmm.
like the web.
So if you're struggling with feelings of self-worth, try to put yourself in a place where you can meditate or pray, or in nature where you can connect with God. I know you mentioned in your book that when you were trying to remember everything you learned from your near-death experience, you would write little notes to yourself. And one of your notes I copied and pasted because I thought it was so fascinating. And you said, "When there is no way out, go within. There you will find your real identity, true security, the root of all fear, intrinsic value, and the power of a single act." And I love that you wrote that as you were, just pondering and trying to remember everything that you learned, because that's really, God wants us to find that. He wants us to find our true identity, that we have worth and value and nothing can take our place. He wants each of us to know that, and that we are loved. Oh, don't you think he wants us to know we're loved?
Absolutely. That's at the crux of all of this. It
Yeah.
all comes back to that universal language that God speaks through all of creation, which is love. That's why when I was in that place, which I call the ethereal,
Mm-hmm.
um, there was no spoken language.
Hmm.
Everything was sensed and felt and absorbed. When Maria spoke to me, just love me. It wasn't in a verbal language like you and I are speaking now. You felt it, and
Mm-hmm.
it was almost like it was like telepathic communication.
Mm.
And so I didn't experience any kind of language, and honestly, that's why it took me 3 years to write the book. I couldn't find language for it.
We did not even talk about that experience of you seeing your daughter and having her tell you that. Do you want to touch on that really quick?
Sure, yeah, no, in that experience, I had learned many things when I was taken into that place, which I call the ethereal. It could have been for seconds, it could have been for a millisecond, it could have been for a minute, who knows? But I was able to see myself, as we talked about, standing in the middle of nowhere. And I was able to look down and see myself in my broken body with a heart pump keeping me alive
Mm-hmm.
in my green hospital gown. Um, I had that moment where I saw the nurses that took care of me coming in and out of the room, and how their lives flashed in front of me. And it was kind of interesting to see how I had judged some of them,
Mm.
and how I had judged myself for my own life. I saw my own life in front of me, how I judged myself so harshly for the mistakes that I had made. And then I saw the web. I saw how we were all connected, how we were all one. And then I saw Maria. Maria came to me, and in the unspoken language of the ethereal, I asked her, Maria, and she was perfect and whole, by the way, and she had that that light in her eyes that was the light that animates all life, which is that spiritual light that comes
Mm-hmm.
from God. And I asked her, I said, Maria, speak to me. I've never heard you say my name. I don't know what to do for you when you're having seizures. I don't know how to help you. We've tried everything. We've tried to find a cure, and I don't know. And I would just broke down, and she just looked at me and she said, "Just love me."
Mm.
That's all she said.
That's
And
so
when she said
beautiful.
that, I was in that moment. I remember feeling free, completely free and unburdened, and there was no more guilt. And that's when I said, I never want to leave this place. biggest mistake I ever made, because then I found myself back in my hospital.
Well, it also teaches us that death isn't something to fear.
Absolutely. Great point. It is not
Um,
something to fear.
and that the greatest gift that we can give to those around us is to love them. And I think one of the other lessons I drew as you were telling that story was that you mentioned how harsh of a critic we are for ourselves and for others. And you sense that. And
Mhm.
perhaps God isn't going to beat us over the head so harshly, that he is mercy and love.
I
I don't
believe
know.
that. I believe that. I believe the as you know, one of the emergency room doctors who I've become very close to, that helped save my life that night, the cardiologist, who is a Sikh. And when I went back to thank him for saving my life, and I walked into his room, and it was a year after transplant, and I saw him, and I said, I never had a chance to thank you for saving my life. And the first thing that came out of his mouth without hesitation was, I didn't save your life. God saved your life.
Mm,
I performed my duty as a physician, but God saved your life.
mm,
And you know that's the kind of, when you think about it, that's what the power of love can do. And that's why I think that God is love and light.
hmm No, you're right. I
Of
think those
course.
are good descriptors of him.
Oh, absolutely. But of course, and this is where I think that you had mentioned some of the quotes that I had put in the book earlier. Um, of course, there's a difference. There is evil, and there is a
Hmm
difference between right and wrong. And I believe we're born innately for that. And that
hmm
comes back to choice.
hmm Yeah, we can choose.
We
We
can
don't
choose.
have to. We don't have to choose God. We can choose darkness.
Absolutely.
But gosh, I'd rather choose light.
Me too.
Oh my
Absolutely.
goodness. Now, I asked you before the break if you would mind explaining to us the title of your book, which is Quarks of Light, and that's spelled Quarks. Would you mind telling us what that word means? Because for me, I did take some advanced science classes in college and stuff, but that's a word we don't use every day.
I know, and we'll see what the reader thinks about it, but I hope that it opens one's imagination. And I, like you, took science classes, and back then, and that's the beauty of our world. It's that we're always learning more and more and more about it.
hmm
So along comes quantum mechanics and quantum physics, right? And then we find out that the atom really isn't the smallest particle of matter. There's something called a quark, and a quark is the smallest building block of matter. And they've come to find out that all matter is made of light. And I struggled with this web and what a quark of light was when I saw it, and it was kind of funny because that's the only description. I could have said, oh, I saw this massive web of neurons. That's what it looked like.
hmm
It kind of hung on the ceiling of the universe, and there was a light inside each one that represented a life. That's what I saw. Um, but for some reason, as the years passed and things began to unfold, and I tried to figure out what this whole experience meant, and I started to research quarks. I said to myself, that's what it was.
Mm,
it was it was and it all I think, Tamara, feeds back to this. We are all part of God's light and love. We all come from that same singular light. So that light is within each of us. And if a quark is the smallest building block of all matter, and we're all made of light, it all kind of makes sense to me in that regard. That's how I see it.
mm. That is, it's a beautiful title when you dive into it and understand that we really all are connected through matter, through energy, through these quarks. I don't even know if I'm saying it right, but
You are. Quark.
there you go. Oh my goodness. This has been so fun. Now, let me ask you this. Has there been a favorite Bible verse that you would like to share that's become meaningful to you during all these years of challenges?
There is, and it's Mark 9:23. Anything is possible if a person believes.
Mm.
And regardless if whoever's listening is a Christian or a Sikh or a Buddhist, or it really doesn't matter, because it all does come down to believing. I mean, that was one of the basic tenets for I am a Christian. That was one of the basic tenets that Christ preached. All we want you to do is believe. It's all I want you to do is believe and love.
Mm.
So,
I love that.
What if we don't believe? I mean, who are we? We don't have faith and we don't believe. The unseen world is, and I said this before, the unseen world is really where our identity and power comes from. And if we don't believe in that, I think that, at least for me, I'm lost. I can't get through a day without it.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I think you're right. That is where we draw our strength from. That's our true self.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So, Rob, let me ask you this. Where can we find you online? I'm sure there's going to be people that listen to this podcast and go, "Oh my goodness, I want to connect with Rob." Where can we find you and more information about your book?
Sure, and I would love to hear from some listeners. So you could find me. My domain name is Rob A. Gentile, robagentile.com. And my Facebook page is also Rob A. Gentile.
Awesome. That is perfect. And we'll put links to all this in the show notes so that people can easily click on it and find you quite easily. But we're so excited. Thank you so much for being willing to share your story and tell these personal experiences that give us just a glimpse into some of the most beautiful parts of your life. You've shared some very, very personal things, and thank you for being willing to share that. I think that it helps us connect with one another better when we see these intimate details of somebody else's life. So thank you for being willing to share that.
I just want to thank you for having me today. It's been an honor to be interviewed by you, be on your show. And I just hope that we can connect in the future. Maybe we can do a follow-up session.
Absolutely. It would be an honor, especially as we get closer to the launch of your book. That would be so fun.
It would be fun.
Thanks, Rob. Hey, thanks so much for listening to today's show. I know that there are many of you out there that are going through a hard time, and I hope you found things that have been useful today as you listen to the podcast. If you would like to access the show notes from today's podcast, visit my website. It is storiesofhopepodcast.com. That is where you'll find favorite quotes from today's episode and shareable memes. And those are fun because you can share them with your friends on social media. You will also find the links mentioned throughout today's episode, so you don't have to remember what those were. And also all the tips that were shared. Sometimes tips are shared so much throughout an episode you forget. What were those great things? So go to the show notes, storiesofhopepodcast.com, to look up these fantastic resources. If someone kept coming to mind during today's episode, perhaps that means that you should share this with them. Maybe there was a story shared or a tip that they really, really need to hear. So go ahead and share this episode with them. May God bless you, especially if you are struggling, with hope to carry on and with the strength to keep going when things get tough. Remember to walk with Christ, and He will help bear that burden. Above all else, remember, God loves you.